And I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the Cambridge Gray Sheet. I write them down. I commit them to my sponsor. I don't eat in between meals no matter what. And absence is the most important thing in my life, without exception. And as I said earlier, my abstinence date is June 14th, 2014. So I celebrated 6 years in June, but it's my second time around, in all honesty. So I want to share a little bit about that. I was born a compulsive overeater, I believe. I don't know the exact genesis of the disease, but I know that I have it because from a very early age, I wasn't neutral around food. It always had some kind of a special attraction for me. And I do know that I was numbing the pain. I figured that out. I know the source of the pain. But I also know that people can endure that kind of pain and they don't turn into alcoholics or compulsive overeaters. So I must have had this on 3 levels. And it wasn't until I got to my first Gray Sheet meeting that I heard about carbohydrate sensitivity. And I like that word, sensitivity. So like I said, I was born a compulsive overeater. I started having this weird relationship with food from a very young age. I was stealing food from age 6 or 7, either from my house or from somebody else's. I kept getting bigger. Nobody in my family ever said anything. I guess I wasn't. I'm not sure I've heard people in these rooms talk about how their parents took them to the doctor and that, all these things, but it was never like that in my family. I just kind of ate and got fat and nobody really said anything about it. So there was no parental intervention. There was no supervision. I was eating on the sly most of the time. I got food from jobs that I worked at, like babysitting. I worked in a pharmacy from age 15 until like around age 20. And, I would sit there at night eating all sorts of sugar and stuff and steal money from the cash register. And I had other food jobs. I was a waitress many times over. When I was 16, I went to my first Weight Watchers meeting and I was really shocked to find out that I weighed 197 pounds. And this Weight Watchers meeting was in a small town in New England. And I was the only person there under the age of practically 60, as far as I could tell. And everybody thought I was so cute, but I had the same experience that everybody else had, which is I ate all week and then I starved myself a day or so before. I'm really talking about sort of the eating, the external, the eating, the fat, but there was a lot of emotional pain that was underneath, including a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of feeling like I was different. And it just wasn't very pleasant. So when I was about 20 years old, I was in college and I felt like this clock was ticking about, I always wonder, like, what was I thinking? And I think what I was thinking, what I've come to realize is that I think I just assumed that this affliction, this addiction, whatever you want to call it, was simply going to stop one day. I didn't have a clue how I was going to stop it. I just figured one day it would stop. And in my mind, I kind of had it like, it'll stop when I become an adult. Like once I get out from under my parents' wing, or once I get out into the real world. And this sort of coincided with maybe graduating from college. But that time was approaching. And the weird thing was the addiction wasn't going anywhere. Before Gray Sheet, I had one successful run at a diet where I went from my 180, 190 pounds to like 140, something like that. And it was my freshman year in college. I just thought, oh, I'm at college. I really got to stop doing this nonsense. So I put myself on a diet. I went home that summer to my family of origin, and I won't get into all that, but basically, I picked up while I was there for the summer, and I went back to school and got worse and worse. And around age 20, I went on a study abroad program to Vienna, Austria. And it was kind of a turning point because before I left, I knew about 9 months in advance. And I said to myself, well, I've got 9 months. So I could go on a diet today. And if I average out what I need to lose, it would only be, X number of pounds a month until I got on the plane. And the months, the number of months got smaller. And before I knew it, I hadn't lost any weight. And I was supposed to fly out the next day. And I had bought some clothes. My mother had made me some skirts because that's what I could fit into. And I slept in these Levi's the night before because I wanted them to stretch out a little bit before I went on this plane ride. And I had been on a plane since I was 5 years old. We didn't, my family didn't have a ton of money. We didn't take flying vacations or anything like that. And I said, I only tell this story because it's sort of a microcosm of my life. But I said to myself, okay, I'm going to get up tomorrow morning before the flight and I am going to stop eating. Well, got a little hectic trying to get to the airport. Airports are the worst for me. I was in the airport that morning. I started eating. I said, when I get on the plane, I'll be locked in the plane. I won't have access to food and I'll start that diet. I got on the plane and they served snacks and they served alcohol. And I ate and drank on the way over. And then I think we had a stopover in, I want to say Belgium or something like that. And I said, I'll stop during the stopover. I didn't stop. We got to Vienna and it was very hectic because they had this person meeting all these young people and they were going to take us to these places that we were going to live. And I was really stressed out and I didn't even know what I was doing there. I don't know how I got there. It's unbelievable. I said, okay, once I get settled and I know who my roommates are and I know where I'm living and I know how to get from point A to point B, I'll stop. Well, the 6 months went by and I hadn't stopped. And I got up every day in the city of Vienna and I said to myself, I'm going to stop. And we went to these classes. It wasn't very demanding. It was all in English. And they would let us out at like 1:00 after this really starchy lunch. And I would head out to go to a museum or this or that, or take a day trip or something like that. And I could not make it past a bakery. And I saw very little of Austria. I saw enough. I saw some things, but I watched my classmates and people were really like digging into the experience. And I just didn't understand it. And some of the women were bought, what are those dresses called? Dirndls. They bought dirndls and they were carrying these little baskets and they really got into it. And just like, it's kind of like the way I live right now. I really get into my life now, like every little detail. I'm into my life. I'm making the most out of it. But back then I couldn't. Make a long story short, I got home. My father was waiting for me. He cried, I cried. I cried because I think he felt that given the circumstances at home, it would have been a good idea for me to get out of the country for a few months. And I think he was hoping, and my father didn't have a lot of money, but I think he was hoping that I might turn the corner because he knew there was something wrong and I hadn't turned the corner. In fact, I was worse. And it was a few months later that I found the Gray Sheet and that started my Gray Sheet journey. And at my very first meeting in Cambridge, I heard the message about addiction, compulsion, carbohydrate sensitivity. The one that really got me was progressive illness because I had seen the progression over my lifetime. And when I heard progressive illness, that's when I knew that I was not going to be able to control this myself, that it was never going to go away like I thought in my head. And I was abstinent for about 5 years. I turned my life around. I tell this story because it's absolutely astounding, but I barely graduated from college. And after I got abstinent, I went back to school and I became what you would know as a chartered accountant, which is incredibly hard. It's like really hard. Like I couldn't even do it today. I don't know how I did it, but because of the program, I would weigh and measure my studying, and I just focused and my head wasn't filled up. And I'm not really that smart. I'm really not, but I took all the tools and I just did this thing that was incredibly hard. And my life took off from there. I got a job, I got a career, I started, I looked nice, I bought nice clothes, like my whole life turned around. And I have 4.5 minutes left or so, but what I want to say is what happened to me, and I can only speak for myself, is that the language of addiction, I have some book about the language of addiction. It's not approved literature. It was written by some psychologist, and he writes about how when you find a solution, you think you're better because the solution's making you feel better. So you give up the solution thinking that you're doing it. And that's exactly what happened to me. I gave up the solution thinking that I was doing it. And for 20 years almost, it's sort of, I had a reprieve. I've heard about people, they leave, they stay thin and they kind of have this half-assed abstinence that might go on. For me, it went on for a handful of years. I stayed close to a normal weight, but it was crazy because it was all about control. And when you're trying to control your eating, the rest of your life becomes insane. And in 2014, some things had happened in this 20 years of progressively getting worse again. Some things had happened to me. I was at a bottom, and I was back in New York, and I knew there was a strong Gray Sheet community here. I had visited the Gray Sheet a couple times over those 20 years, but never stayed. It was always about the weight. It was always about getting back to goal weight. You would think I would have learned that it's not about the weight, but I seem to have never, ever learned that. And this time I finally learned it. I learned that it wasn't about the weight. I was back to the 180s. I'd never lived in New York before. I don't know if you've ever been to New York, but the subway stairs are very, very steep and they're very hard to get up and down. And I didn't see how I could live in this city. I didn't know how people lived here and were heavy. It just didn't seem possible to me. This is a very hard place to live. It's very physical living in New York. So I came back and now I have 2.5 minutes. And I just want to say that I don't want to ever go through what I went through in the first part of my life when I was young up until the time I turned 20. And I certainly don't want to go through what I went through between the ages of 35 and 55. I don't want to go through that again. My life is so stable right now. Stable on the point of being boring. I've been able to manage through this COVID. I'm probably in denial, but most days I felt okay, but I am starting to get a little bit frustrated. I'm so grateful for these meetings. I get up every morning. I do a gratitude list. And I always have freedom from food on that list. I don't always have abstinence. I don't always have the program, but I always have freedom from food because that's the biggest thing I get out of this. And that means to me that during the day, I largely, for the most part, do not think about food. And that is all I ever used to think about. That's what freedom from food means for me. It means that if I'm hungry, I still don't have to eat because I know there's another meal coming. It means that I don't have a tick. I don't have a monkey on my shoulder. I don't have this thing kind of talking to me. It's simply not there. It's a miracle. And I don't do it alone. I mean, that's the other big thing I learned is that I don't do this alone. As far as service goes, I'm the treasurer of New York Intergroup. I've been on the Roundup committee for several years now. And those two things, which are more than just speaking at a meeting and more than attending a meeting, I don't think I would be here if I didn't do those things, frankly, because my mind likes to think I'm well. And I'm not telling anybody to do, if you're not doing service and you're abstinent, I'm not trying to guilt you or shame you or anything like that. I'm just saying for me, with my experience, I need to keep I need to keep myself firmly implanted and locked into these rooms with a key and a lock. That's what I need to do. And I'm very, very grateful. So thank you very much.